Modern.
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 We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern bar cart.
What's shaking, cocktail fans? Happy New Year and welcome to this 2019 kickoff episode of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Modern Bar Cart CEO Eric Kozlik. I gotta tell you, we've got some great stuff coming in the next few months here, and this week's interview is right at the head of the pack. Our guest is Philadelphia-based bartender Paul MacDonald, who is currently behind the stick at a wonderful establishment called Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right on historic Rittenhouse Square. I met Paul a few years back, and we'll hear that story in just a few moments here. But before we do, I think this would be a marvelous time for you to make yourself a drink. This week's featured cocktail ingredient is Laird's Applejack, which is an American apple brandy produced in New Jersey. We talk a little bit about this really interesting spirit during the lightning round, but I wanted to feature it here for a couple reasons. First, its dark, mellow flavor profile fits really well with this time of year when we're all kind of hunkered down waiting on spring to show up. And second, it's a really interesting historical spirit. Back when cocktails first became popular, there were a lot more fruit brandies being produced here in the United States. And so I think Laird's Applejack is a great way to get back to our agricultural roots as a cocktail nation. Now, if you're first starting out with a bottle of Applejack, which really shouldn't run you any more than $25 or $30, no matter where you are in the US, what I'd recommend doing is swapping it out for whiskey or brandy in your favorite classic cocktails. That means Old Fashions, Manhattans, Sidecars, Sazeracs, Vucares, Juleps, and Brambles are all on the table, along with all the others I forgot to mention. But perhaps the most famous Applejack cocktail is called the Jack Rose. To make this drink, you'll need, very simply, 2 ounces of Applejack, 3/4 of an ounce of grenadine, which is a pomegranate syrup, and then 3/4 of an ounce of lemon juice. Combine all those ingredients in a mixing glass with ice, shake it well, and strain into a stemmed cocktail glass with an optional apple slice or brandied cherry garnish. Personally, I think a nice dehydrated apple wheel would look really nice there, but that's just me. One last thing to note is if you don't know where to pick up grenadine, it's actually pretty easy to make at home. You can actually just whip up a 1-to-1 simple syrup using whatever sugar you prefer, and in place of the water, you can use just pomegranate juice, and that is going to yield you something that is almost indistinguishable from all the commercial grenadines out there. So if you're running into problems, the DIY approach for that Jack Rose ingredient might just do the trick. Getting back to our interview with bartender, Instagram icon, and hospitality guru Paul MacDonald, some of the things we discuss include how Paul approaches a hospitality situation with different types of customers. He walks us through some of the questions and decision paths that he follows to create an excellent cocktail experience that's personalized to each customer who walks in the door. Which house-made ingredients are his go-to flavors for wowing guests and creating drinks that disrupt the traditional linear flavor experience we've come to expect? We'll explain what we mean by a linear flavor experience during the interview. The way Paul develops new cocktails, and how he turned to the Fibonacci sequence of all things as a new and unexpected paradigm for creating his drinks. A few tips for taking your cocktail Instagram game to the next level. Deep thoughts on everything from martinis to bar interior decorating and much, much more. You can find Paul on his incredible Instagram account at express_and_discard. And currently, you can find him behind the bar at Friday, Saturday, Sunday in Philadelphia. We'll have an interactive map right on the show notes page, so be sure to stop by next time you're in the Philly area. And now, without further ado, please enjoy this stimulating conversation with one of my personal favorite mixologists, Paul MacDonald. Paul, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm extremely excited for this interview because I've been waiting a long time to talk to you. I've had this one experience with you as a patron of an establishment where you were behind the bar, and it's been kind of rattling around in my head ever since. And so I'm excited to get into all of what you have to share about cocktails. But first, can you just introduce yourself to our listeners and tell people who you are and how you got to be doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad that the experience you had at my bar stuck with you so much. I actually no longer work at that particular establishment. I've moved just across Rittenhouse Square to a new restaurant called Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We've been open for just a little over 2 years now at the new place. We just celebrated our second anniversary actually on December 8th.
Oh, congrats.
Thank you. But I've been bartending for almost 9 years now, starting in 2010. I'm from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania originally. And I moved to Philadelphia in late 2011 and worked at a couple of places that are no longer open. But I would say the biggest highlights of my career so far started at A Bar, where I met you, which would have been in 2015. And I was there for 2 years, and I've been at Friday, Saturday, Sunday now for 2 years as well.
Right.
I would say working in that neighborhood, working in Rittenhouse Square has really gone a long way toward helping me to develop my own style and develop my kind of philosophy on hospitality and on cocktails, and kind of have an opportunity to establish myself in the city scene.
Right. So did you start out as a bartender? Did you work your way up as a barback? What happened there?
I did start out as a bartender, actually. I was working in a small town at the time, and I had the good fortune to be hired for a job that I really wasn't qualified for, but that gave me lots of opportunities to learn and to learn through experience and kind of learn from my failures and from my successes and all that. So I've been very fortunate in that way. I was able to start as a bartender in 2010.
Right. So in Rittenhouse Square, for folks who aren't kind of familiar with the area, it's a kind of center city Philadelphia. It's very beautiful.
Yeah, it's the primary kind of tourism and shopping district. It's the highest priced real estate in the city. It's a great place to work in restaurants. We have a really great restaurant scene, tons and tons of foot traffic, and the people who live in the neighborhood there are just wonderful people.
Yeah. So the first time, let me kind of describe for our listeners the experience that I had when I walked into A Bar, which is, again, different from the place where you're working now. And we can use that to maybe jump into some of your thoughts on what it takes to build a great cocktail experience. How's that sound? Mm-hmm. So it was just, I don't even remember really what month it was, but I think it was like a nice fall, or it was like an early fall or a late spring day. I was walking around with my good friend Luke, who's an occupational therapist here in Philly. He had just moved here and gotten a new job, and he was kind of showing me around because I had never really been to the area. And I asked him if there were any good cocktail spots or places where we could just pop in and grab a drink and get a sense of the scene. So we were in the Rittenhouse Square area. We kind of took a tour around the square, and he said, "Oh, I've heard good things about this bar, A Bar, but I've never been in." We popped in, and it was this beautiful little bar kind of extending off the side of a hotel, right?
Yep.
And I remember the light was really nice, and it was a first story bar, and it had a really nice view of all the foot traffic and the park. And so
great people watching.
Yeah, really, really good people watching, which I enjoy from a bar.
Yeah.
Some people like that really intimate kind of like just darker you and the bartender situation, but for day drinking like that, really, really beautiful. And so we sat down, and we just immediately recognized that the menu was a pretty special cocktail menu. It was it sounds weird to say this, but it was ingredient focused was the first thing that I realized. The ingredients that were being called out were obviously very carefully curated. It wasn't just like, nothing against the old fashioned, but it wasn't just whiskey, sugar, bitters. It was very specific syrups, and you could tell that there was some house made stuff going on as well.
Yeah.
So I paid attention immediately. And then you entered the picture and we started having this really great conversation. And because the bar wasn't super crowded, you were able to pay kind of a special brand of attention to us. And that was a very formative experience for me in cocktails, because I don't think to that point that I'd had that directive of focus from a bartender who was also kind of an auteur of the menu in that really hyper curated way. So I guess having that experience being described, can you talk to our listeners about how you approach creating great cocktail experiences for people, and maybe in a general sense, and then we can dive into some of the individual like strategies that you use?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel very strongly that the most important aspect of a cocktail bar is its flexibility and the ability to craft an experience to an individual guest. So in a restaurant with a kitchen, there's so much prep that goes into each individual dish. There's so much planning, and there are so many perishable ingredients. You're very limited. You put out a menu, you can possibly make slight modifications to the dishes on the menu, but when it comes down to it, you're going to be ordering something that's from the menu. A cocktail bar can have a lot more freedom than that. We have so many non-perishable ingredients that we work with. We have so much flexibility. And I have always felt that it's very important to build a cocktail menu that draws a guest in and kind of encourages them to delve deeper into the experience, build a relationship with the bartender, and ultimately, I like to build a cocktail menu that encourages people to order off menu. So the cocktails on the menu are a token of what we do. It's a way to invite you and to show you our style. And if you like our style and if you like what you're tasting, there's so much more that we have available. So I like to do cocktail service very conversationally. I like to try to build that relationship with each individual guest when possible, and try to customize your experience and give you exactly the drink that you're looking for right now. So I have a lot of regular guests that have been coming to my bar for years, and they never actually order anything specific. They just come to my bar and ask me to make them whatever new thing I'm working on, or to give them whatever they need for the food that they're eating or for where they are in their day. You know, one thing that I like to do a lot is ask people, you know, have you eaten yet? Are you planning to eat? You know, what point of your day are you in? Is this your last drink of the night? Have you already been drinking for a few hours? Is this your first drink of the day? Kind of get an idea of where they are in their day and what drink would be appropriate for right now. However long they're planning to stay at my bar, however long they're planning to, you know, continue their current experience, whether it's at my bar or somewhere else. I like to look for context in order to create the perfect experience for them at that moment.
To me, that sounds a lot like almost like improv inputs.
Yeah.
During an improv set, you ask the audience for an input, and then you use sort of the rules of whatever game you're playing or long form set you're doing to incorporate those inputs from the audience. And so it seems like some of the rules of the game might be, you know, like the aperitivo, digestivo, nightcap type situation.
Absolutely.
Like that's one kind of set of constraints you can put that their feedback through, and then it seems like you have others. So those are a really interesting set of questions. Are there any other sets of or types of questions or ways that you get into the headspace of the patron and figure out what best to make them?
Well, for one thing, it's important to note that it's not just about the drinks that I'm making them. It's about viewing cocktail service as an aspect of hospitality. And this is the reason why, personally, I love working in restaurants. I love working in a cocktail bar that is part of a restaurant where I can serve food and we can have an interesting wine program and we can have all kinds of other things. The kind of fussy cocktail dens that are so super focused on cocktails and serve little to no food, you can certainly have great experiences there, and they have the ability to put together some amazing drinks because they are able to focus all of their attention on just making cocktails. But what I personally am more interested in is building that larger hospitality experience of which food and so many other things are a part. So, I will, the question of whether someone is dining with us is one of the first big things to get out of the way. And then the question becomes, what are you eating? Are we going to do cocktail pairings? Are we going to do wine pairings? Are you looking for just something that you can sip on while you snack? So that's a huge part of it. The question of food. But a lot of it is nonverbal, and a lot of it is also just trying to get an idea for where they are, just by talking to them. If they're out with friends, if they're by themselves, what kind of a mood they seem to be in. There's a lot of nonverbal communication, I would say, that goes into it.
For sure. And hospitality is such a huge trend right now, not only in cocktail programs, but in any sort of bar or restaurant setting. I think the way that I see it is that since the cocktail renaissance started, we've been able to master the $8 old fashioned. We've been able to master the $8 martini. We've been able to master the classics, and the availability of good quality products at reasonable prices has allowed us to do some of that. And so once I saw these bartenders, mixologists in these bar programs rounding out their exploration of all the classic cocktails, it almost became like this searching for what's next. And it seems like a lot of people came to the conclusion that hospitality is really a place that you can assert yourself in the space and really demonstrate that your program has something to offer. So I guess before we move on to how you go about developing the cocktails themselves that your Instagram so beautifully showcases, what are your thoughts on hospitality, and do you have any specific approaches or ways of thinking about that might be useful for our listeners?
That's complicated. Hospitality it's all about anticipating needs, as you hear and read so often in classic hospitality books. And it's, there are steps of service, and there are these formal aspects of hospitality that are vitally important to master, but are really just the first step. And what's really more important, what you're ultimately building toward once you've mastered the technique of hospitality, what you're really moving toward is the ability to build relationships with people, and preferably to build relationships with people very quickly. So many times you have a single opportunity to make that impression on a guest. So they come into your bar to check you out, and you need them to leave impressed, or else they might never be back, and you might not have another opportunity. So, it's very important, I think, to try to engage conversationally as much as possible, and to try to make people feel comfortable and make them feel like they want to come back. And like I said, the cocktails are one of many ways to do that. And
right.
And I don't want to downplay the importance of the cocktails either, because people, obviously people enjoy drinking, but more importantly, or equally importantly at least, I think that when you're able to curate that experience, and when you're able to really nail a guest's preferences, that's what keeps people coming back, and that's what keeps the experience rattling around in their mind and reminds them that they want to come back there and check it out again.
Absolutely. And there's these two competing sets of power dynamics as soon as somebody walks into the bar and sits down, right? There's the power dynamic where you are the knowledge base, you are the expert, you're the artist who created this. And in that respect, you have power over them to influence the shape of their experience. On the other hand, they're paying you, which means, at least for now, they're your boss. And so I feel like in order to form a good relationship between a patron and a bartender, you have to find a way to kind of equalize both of those two power dynamics so that everybody's happy, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, what the challenge in many cases is to kind of exude enough confidence that they feel confident in your knowledge of, what it will take to give them a good experience in this restaurant. You know, when it comes down to it, I know the food menu, I know the drink menu, I know what we do here, and what I need to try to do is convince you that I know the best way for you to experience our thing. Even if you already know what you like, it's possible that we can offer you something different that you didn't realize before that you liked.
Right. It's still your journey, but now you have a guide.
And of course, you know, you have to gain their trust. You have to build it organically. But that's ultimately what I'm going for, you know. I mean, there are different types of guests also. You know, we have a lot of regulars also that know exactly what they like. People that come into the bar and they order the same thing every single time. And I have no problem whatsoever with that. If you already know what you like and we are able to offer it to you, then I'm honored that you've chosen our bar as the place where you like to enjoy it. And I have no problem with that whatsoever.
Totally.
But I do like to offer that customized experience to people that are looking for it.
Totally. Well, those are great thoughts on hospitality. Kit, let's move on to the cocktails now, because I don't even remember if I came to your Instagram before I walked into your bar and then realized it was the bartender in front of me whose Instagram I had been following, or if it was the other way around. But you have a beautiful Instagram account.
Thank you.
And just the cocktails that show up on a weekly basis on my feed are simultaneously impressive, inspiring, and kind of provoke me to try and up my own game in my home bar. So I think it would be really interesting to hear you talk about whether you're doing it kind of for the Instagram, kind of on your own at home, or whether you're doing it for a specific inclusion on a menu. How do you approach designing a cocktail that is not just an old fashioned or a Manhattan or a martini?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, tying it into my comments before about my style of service and, you know, customizing the experience and selling off menu cocktails. Ultimately, the other thing that's really nice about that, the secondary advantage to that, is that I always have new cocktails in development. You know, it's an easy way to constantly be selling new experiments and be able to get, you know, real-time reactions from real people to a new recipe that I'm playing around with. You know, I always have new drinks that I'm playing around with, and ultimately some of them make the cut and end up on the menu. Ultimately, a lot of them don't. I always have a whole bunch of cocktails that I'm making for people on a regular basis that don't even have a name yet. And the regulars that I talked about that you know, always order whatever I'm working on are used to that. They know better than to ask if this one has a name, because they know it's not going to have a name yet. So that's one aspect that's nice. It really helps with kind of the R&D phase of it. And it allows me to just kind of have a bunch of new cocktails always on the back burner, that when I need to change something out of the menu, I can just pull something out and plug it into that space. A lot of the time, not always. Mm-hmm. But that definitely is a secondary advantage, like I said. But when it comes to the actual development of flavors, the development of house-made ingredients and things like that, I've gone through a lot of different phases. I think this is probably pretty typical, but you know, over the course of my career, I've gone through a big phase with shrubs. I've gone through a big phase with Amaro. I've gone through, you know, phases with all the different spirits and all that. But recently I've been, in the past few years, I've really been looking at some of my favorite cocktails that I've made in the past few years have been cocktails in which I'm trying to kind of fundamentally restructure the way that flavors flow through a drink. In my mind, a lot of the great classic cocktails have kind of a very linear palette to them. They go from point A to point B. If you think of a Manhattan or a martini, the flavors flow in one direction. And I've been experimenting a lot with pure spirit cocktails, especially, that take kind of a more winding path through your palate. And that's what I've been going for. And that's the way that I've been trying to develop flavors. So I'm trying to take a lot of disparate flavors, a lot of flavors that kind of hit your palate at different points, and in a different order, and combine them in such a way that you taste every single one, but you taste them in sequence, instead of it being one single flavor. I like a drink that takes a whole bunch of unexpected turns from the moment that you first sip it until a couple seconds after you've swallowed it. Now that's especially true of a lot of the pure spirit cocktails that I've been doing. Like I said, of course, I'm putting together a cocktail menu, so it's necessary to have a variety of different types of flavors. You can't have every single one of them be this heady, intellectual, boozy drink. But I have been experimenting with every different class of ingredient that I can find that kind of sticks out in different places in the palate. So I mean, I've been doing a lot recently with low alcohol pure spirit cocktails that are based on fortified wines, and Amari and things like that, for example, because the flavors are so intricate, and you can work with them to make the flavors layer in so many different ways and get such interesting flavor contours. I have a few specific house-made ingredients that I just keep coming back to. A couple of them that, I make again and again, year after year, as the seasons go.
Let's talk about those.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would say probably my most used one right now is lemon and coriander shrub. It's essentially lemon peels. It's a lemon oleosaccharum that I dissolve into a coriander seed tea, strain out the solids, and then fortify it with rice vinegar. Now I've found so many different applications for this. I've been making this ingredient for 5 or 6 years now. And I usually bring it back every spring and summer, and do at least one new drink on the menu with it. But I've found so many different applications using it in citrus drinks as well as pure spirit drinks, combining it with clear spirits and dark spirits. It's actually featured in 2 separate drinks on our menu right now at work. Which I very rarely double up ingredients on a list, but it's 2 very different applications. Mm-hmm. And it's a very versatile ingredient. It adds it adds a very distinct type of acidity to a drink. And I like it particularly with pure spirit cocktails because it allows you to add acid without adding citrus juice. Right.
And the rice wine too is something that's just a little bit uncanny for the American palate, mm-hmm. because most of us have tasted it at some point.
Right.
But with the shrub, we're expecting either apple cider or regular distilled white vinegar.
Yeah.
And so you're messing a little bit with expectations while mm-hmm. also checking the right boxes. But then I find with rice-based spirits, like a Mekong mm-hmm. whiskey, for example, and with rice wine vinegar, there's this really interesting, I want to say, a sweetness to it that lingers without affecting the acidity level necessarily.
Right. Well, that's just the thing. The acidity is distinctive, and you can't miss it. It's definitely there, but it's a very gentle acidity. Mm-hmm. And it gives you, it's like I said, it's versatile. It works with all types of different ingredients exactly because of that. It's gentle, and it's perceived as sweet, even if it's not sweet.
Sure.
Your palate perceives it that way.
What other house-made ingredients do you keep on coming back to, or do you find yourself returning to, even if you don't, feature them on a menu at all times?
Well, a lot of seasonal ones. So, for example, during the fall, I like to do a fig syrup, which I actually had to skip this year because it's been a terrible season for figs. But I have, I am very proud of my fig syrup. That's obvious. That's easy. And I always keep, a habanero tincture on hand so that I can make any drink spicy, for example. But I have, there's a savory bitters, I call it. It's not really a bitters. I just don't really have a better word for it. I don't like putting the word tincture on my menu. which I use pretty extensively, and it's been featured in one particular drink on our menu ever since we opened, actually, but I use it in all kinds of applications. It's essentially, it's an infusion that's structured like a bitters, but completely with ingredients that kind of come out of the kitchen. So the primary bittering agent is mustard seed. Then it uses caraway, fennel, star anise, black peppercorn, and dehydrated lemon peel. So I like using that a lot, especially in citrusy drinks. It's a really nice. It adds a really nice, gentle, savory undertone to anything, and it's a very approachable bitters. It's a very approachable savory flavor that you can put in, entry level bright citrusy cocktails.
Sure.
But I've also I've had a lot of success using it in darker drinks as well. Like one drink that's very popular that has never been on the menu, but I make it for people all the time. I basically make an old fashioned that's based on Bull's Geneva with savory bitters and Pedro Jimenez sherry as the sweetener. And there once again, you get that effect where you get these flavors swirling around. You kind of taste each of the different spices from the savory bitters coming out at a different point and folding into those other flavors in different ways and at different times.
Yeah, I call those drinks drinks that won't sit still.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the first time I had caraway in a cocktail was when I came to A Bar. I don't know if you were only using it in a syrup at that point or something, but it was definitely something that you kind of said, hey, give this a shot.
It may very well have been the first batch that I ever made of this savory bitters. It's very possible because that was at A Bar.
Cool.
But yeah, the one particular project that has been very influential that I've been having a lot of fun with for the past couple of years and has inspired a lot of my cocktails recently. I've been making cocktails that pure spirit cocktails with their ingredient ratios based on the Fibonacci sequence. So this project started out by accident, actually. The original version of it, I originally had an idea in mind to make a drink completely out of fortified wines. So as I recall, it was the ones I was working with were Rare Wine Company, Boston Boal Madeira, Cardamaro, Punta Mes, Tempus Fugit, Quinquina, Larador, and Colchi Vermouth de Torino.
Boom. That's a very interesting and widespread group of ingredients.
I figured it's ingredients that cover a huge range of different flavors. And my thought was there must be a way that I can combine all these things in such a way that, like I said before, you taste everything in succession. Everything, it kind of sprawls out across your palate and gives you that lingering flavor experience with that interesting flavor contour. And I experimented with a lot of different ratios. I put different orders, different every ratio you can imagine. And the one that ended up working just happened to be a quarter, half, 3/4, 1 1/4, which lines up perfectly with the Fibonacci sequence. So I am aware that when you factor in the different textures and the different sweetness levels and everything of all these drinks, it's not, the Fibonacci sequence isn't exactly this magical thing, but it's been a really interesting, it's been a really interesting experiment. It's become a really cool way to kind of force myself to think about drinks in a different way, where I set out with the goal in mind to make a drink based on this ratio. And if a certain flavor isn't working, I don't adjust the ratio. I adjust the ingredient. And so rather than tweaking the ratio, I'm always tweaking the ingredients, and I'm always looking for new ingredients that perfectly fit into this slot. Or in some cases, I'm, putting an ingredient that I'm already familiar with in this slot, and it's functioning in a way that I didn't realize that it could. And I'm tasting new things that I never tasted in this thing that I was already familiar with. So that's been a fun kind of side project also.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought up the Fibonacci sequence cocktails, because that's a project that you told me about when I came to A-Bar. And it's funny, usually when I hear a brilliant idea like this, I immediately go home and see if I can execute on it somehow. I have never gotten to the point where I've tried this at home, even though, I think my home bar is certainly to the point where I have enough ingredients where I can start, messing around. God knows I have enough bitters. So I want to dig into this for a couple reasons. One is I think that this Fibonacci sequence and the way that you've been using kind of a visual or spatial understanding of flavor so far in this conversation, I think they're related to one another.
Absolutely.
Because I was going to ask you to define this, but I'll just let you correct me if I'm wrong here. You talk about, how a lot of cocktails have a very linear progression. And that kind of is a nod to the palate, right? It starts on the front of the tongue, moves back to the tongue, and then as you swallow and then breathe, you get more of that retronasal experience as it goes up, and you get more of the aromas on the back end. And it seems like it's more interesting now that we've mastered kind of some of these kind of standard cocktails to see if we can break that and play around with it a little bit and break expectations, right? Because that's where delight comes from in comedy and poetry, whatever, right? So the Fibonacci sequence certainly is something that breaks conventional expectations. And the other reason I wanted to talk about the Fibonacci sequence right now is that it seems kind of timely, because I believe there's a book, and I could be wrong, so I apologize to the authors of this book if this is not what they're going for, but I believe it's called the Cocktail Codex.
Yeah.
And I think their thesis might be, from what I've heard, that there's only like a small handful of cocktails that all of the cocktails have kind of grown out of.
Yeah.
And how does the Fibonacci sequence map onto that? I don't think it maps onto any of those handful that they might be talking about.
I unfortunately haven't actually gotten around to buying the Cocktail Codex yet. I've flipped through it in the bookstore and it looks so interesting, and I'm planning on picking up a copy and reading it soon. But I would absolutely agree, without having read the book yet, that there's a small number of cocktails that everything has come from. I don't know what their small number is, but in my mind, I think of the basic cocktails as being the original cocktail, that is the old fashioned, structured with liquor, bitters, and sugar. The Martinez, structured with liquor, some type of a weakening agent, a fortified wine or an Amaro or something, and possibly bitters, possibly not. That would include, Martinez, Manhattan, Martini, Negroni, and a million more modern ones.
So you put the Negroni into the Martinez category.
Yeah, I think of a Negroni basically as being a split base of gin and Campari, with the Campari also functioning as a bitters. But then, a basic sour, which includes the majority of all classic cocktails, actually, that are structured on liquor, citrus, sweetener, and possibly a bittering or modifying agent, or possibly not. And those are the three basic flavor structures. And then, you could argue that a Collins or a Buck is different, potentially. But the point is, I would definitely agree that, the overwhelming majority of old cocktails are based on these couple of really basic recipes. You could debate the details of what exactly the basics are, but it is a small number. And that was kind of the reason that I started exploring this new type of flavor contour, because I'm looking for ways to structure flavors differently. So on paper, pretty much all of my Fibonacci cocktails, on paper, they would read like my definition of a Martinez family cocktail. If you're, splitting up different bases and modifiers into different pieces and all that, but they would read basically like that. But they don't drink like that. The flavor is the way that the flavor unfolds in your palate is very different. The contour of it is very different. And that's the idea, to kind of create a new type of structure for a drink and a new type of structure for flavors.
That's so fascinating. Have you, so the drink that you described as being the genesis of the Fibonacci sequence was a 5-ingredient drink. So if we're following the Fibonacci sequence, that's 1, 1, 2, 3, 5 in terms of the ratio. Do you ever lop off that 5 and then do a 1, 1, 2, 3 with different measurements?
Occasionally, and I've also on a couple of occasions done 7-ingredient ones that are, you know, eighth, quarter, 3/8, 5/8, 1, 1 and 5/8, which I know it's ridiculous, but you know, just taking the experiment to its conclusion, why not?
Yeah.
It's fun, you know, and you really, yeah, it's interesting to see the way that different ingredients can interact, and that ratio, it's a very good workable ratio. So yeah, I've played around a little bit. The overwhelming majority of them are 5-ingredient ones.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, I love hearing about somebody who kind of goes on a little project and then doesn't abandon it after a couple of tries, right? You're still getting value about this, which is why I'm so glad we're here to talk about it. So to listeners out there, you've got a new template for thinking about cocktails. So if you've been building your home bar, what I'd encourage you to do is see if you can use the Fibonacci sequence to do a new riff on something that's kind of tried and true. So please definitely tag us at Modern Bar Cart. And also, Paul, you want to share your Instagram handle since we can talk about that next?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my Instagram handle is express and discard with underscores in between each word.
Yeah. So is that your stance on how a proper martini should be made?
Honestly, no. It's just catchy.
It is that.
I do love a martini with a twist instead of olives. That's my go-to, but I usually leave the twist in. I think that there are lots of cocktails where the twist should be discarded and lots where it should be left in. You know, I think it really depends on the specific cocktail. Sure.
So what I wanted to do is talk a little bit more about the photo taking aspect of your brand. It's kind of, you have a brand, and a lot of people out there, especially our followers, they'll tag us in all their cocktail experiments, and we get a whole range of them. Some of them are, you can tell they spent a long time staging this. Some of them are just, hey, here's what I'm drinking, thanks for the recipe. But for folks who are looking to take their Instagram game or their documentation game to the next level, how do you stage a cocktail for a photo? What are some of the things that you take into account?
Well, I exclusively use an iPhone for my pictures, which limits me to a great extent in terms of the locations where I can take a good picture, because it pretty much has to be next to a window. Usually the pictures are staged pretty quickly, kind of right before or in the middle of service. So, you know, there's a certain time crunch aspect to it that necessitates me not having equipment and stuff that I have to set up. But I mean, it's a matter of finding the right time of day. Finding the right time of day when the sunlight is good wherever your window is. Paying attention to everything that's in the frame. You know, it's nice being able to take the pictures in a restaurant because it's easy to find a variety of different usable backgrounds and different usable angles. You know, I like to, as I've gradually come into my own. If you go back on my Instagram feed, you'll see that it's gone through many phases and it's come a long way. I am not a photographer by any means. I have no training in this, and I'm just a guy with an iPhone, and I'm always learning. But you know, I have been trying in more recent months to, you know, put more consideration into the color scheme of a picture and how it complements the subject, that is the drink, etc. But Instagram is I've been surprised at how useful and how practical of a tool it has actually been. I never had a personal Instagram account previously. My wife is a very talented photographer and has been running a personal Instagram page from back before Instagram was really popular, and I never really understood it. And she's the one who originally encouraged me to start a page and to use it just to promote my own cocktails and kind of build my own brand from that. And it's turned out to be a very worthwhile endeavor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I love the marble that you get to use.
Yeah.
Are there little like spots in the bar that are just really, really useful? Is there anything about like, because Friday, Saturday, Sunday, why don't we take a second to describe it for folks?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I kind of gave a little description of A Bar, but your new spot, or the spot you were most recently at, what does it look like? What's the atmosphere? What's the vibe? Why should somebody come and see you there?
When you walk in the front door, you're greeted first by a 13-seat marble bar. When it originally opened, when we were in the construction phase, the owners actually drove up to Danby, Vermont, and hand selected the slab of marble that would become their bar top. And it's a beautiful and eye-catching bar top. So 13 seats. And then there's a marble drink rail on the opposite wall with no seats. It's all standing room, as well as a marble table up in the front window, which is featured pretty prominently in my Instagram page. So the only seats in the bar are the 13 that are actually there, but we have a ton of standing room. The decor is very it's very classic. It's very timeless. So there's the walls are paneled with the beautiful panels they stripped out of an old office building that happened to be built in the same year, I believe 1898.
Wow.
That fit perfectly into the room and make it look beautiful. We have really nice kind of Renaissance revival style sculptures behind the bar. So it's a beautiful and very cozy space, very warm colors, very inviting, and it's a nice atmosphere to settle into. And there's a huge window in the front that allows in a ton of light, which is great for photography, obviously, and also great for the vibe in there,
right.
At least during the daylight hours.
And this is a establishment with the bar downstairs and then a full dining room upstairs, right? Correct.
The upstairs. The upstairs is a different atmosphere. There is no bar up there. It's all table seating. The one wall is decorated with these massive and really beautiful Zuber murals that depict it's kind of like a fanciful depiction of the Tuileries Gardens in Paris. Shutters over the windows. It's still very cozy, but it feels less like a bar and more like a home.
Sure.
It's a little more private upstairs. Downstairs, it's very much, you're on display. People can see in the window and see who's there. They can get a feel for the vibe. Upstairs is much quieter, much more kind of,
you're there to eat.
More low-key environment. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's
sure.
more private. You're there to eat. Exactly.
Great. Well, we'll let you give out all the address and contact info for how to visit Friday, Saturday, Sunday here at the end of the episode. But for now, how do you feel about a couple lightning round questions?
Sure, absolutely.
Cool. So what we like to start with, and this is always tricky for bartenders, what's your favorite cocktail? And if you don't have a favorite of all time, what's something that you've been more recently obsessed with?
Honestly, if I had to pick one cocktail, the cocktail that I order when I go out, 2-to-1 martini with a lemon twist. Boodle's Gin if they have it.
Beautiful. Boodle's Gin. Any particular vermouth?
I like Dolan. Nuali Pra is great too.
Yeah.
I'm flexible though.
Dolan Dry is great.
There's actually there's a bar in town called Oyster House that makes their own dry vermouth, and it's fantastic. I love their martini.
Very nice. I love that. I do a 4-to-1, but I think sometimes when the situation changes, I think a very underrated move is changing your vermouth level to like adjust to the situation that you're in.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like that's an underrated move. So folks out there who are listening who are martini drinkers, think about customizing your martini to what you're doing, whether you're just having a nightcap or if you're about to have some oysters or something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The real question is, how much gin do I want to drink right now?
There you go. That's a simpler way to look at a martini. So if you were a cocktail tool or ingredient, what would you be and why?
That's a That's an interesting one. I'm gonna say my favorite ingredient to work with and my favorite spirit, which is Laird's Bonded Apple Brandy.
And that's quasi-local?
Yeah, Scobeyville, New Jersey. It's not a far drive, right across the bridge.
Yep.
Yeah, it's classic and indispensable.
What do you like to make with that?
I like to make a lot of things with it. I have one original recipe that is very popular. It's called the Conquest of Gaul. It's Laird's 100 proof apple brandy with Benedictine, Lafroig 10-year, and honey syrup.
So
with a lemon twist.
Little take on a terrapin.
I'm actually not familiar with the terrapin.
I don't know if the terrapin has Benedictine. I think it might have chartreuse instead. But look up the terrapin cocktail because I believe that is one of the classic Applejack or apple brandy cocktails.
I will definitely look into that.
I'm very partial to the French apple brandies, the Calvados.
As am I.
Yeah. So, man, Laird's Applejack. That's really, and the Conquest of Gaul. It reminds me of Little Giants, the annexation of Puerto Rico. It's like the football play that they run at the end. So you got the Applejack, and what was the other ingredient?
Lafroig, and then Benedictine and honey. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Very cool. Laird's Applejack. Fantastic. We have not had that one yet. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question. We referenced the cocktail codex earlier, and I think this is something that both you and I need to go our separate ways, do our homework, and then come back with some fresher thoughts on, because it's definitely a newer book. But are there any particular books that you would recommend that were influential for you as you were learning to make cocktails?
Absolutely. The first book that really got me into this whole field was David Wondrick's Imbibe, which I'm sure is the case for a lot of people. It's such an informative book, and it's also such an engaging read. It really just kind of draws you in, and it makes you thirsty to learn more and to read more. And when I first read that, there wasn't nearly as much additional material to read afterward. But I would say, with that being the thing that originally hooked me, the books that I've been really enjoying for the past few years are the ingredient-focused books. I really loved Talia Baiocchi's book on sherry, Emma Jansen's Mezcal book. Brad Thomas Parsons' books are fantastic. His Bitters and Amaro books have been hugely informative. And for me, it's really great being able to buy a book from an expert in one particular field and learn all about this ingredient, and it gives me new things to taste, and it gives me new things to look for. So often, most of the time, they're also full of recipes also, and new things to try out and new ways to see this ingredient. So I would say just in general, I've loved the focus on kind of ingredient category focused books in the past few years. There have been so many of them.
Yeah, the way I think about those, it's almost like somebody, so these authors, they obviously spend like a couple years, like they spend years of their life researching and creating these books. It's almost like they threw themselves on a grenade for you so that you could pick up the book and just run,
Absolutely. They did all the legwork, and we get to just buy the book and read it. And it's as easy as that.
Yeah, just go into the bar and cackle like a little child, like creating these awesome things. So yeah, cool. Ingredient focused books. We'll list those that you mentioned on the show notes page over at modernbarcart.com/podcast. So if anyone wants to pick those up, you can just head right over to the show notes page and click on the link, and we'll shoot you over to Amazon or the author's page or wherever you can pick it up. So last kind of round of advice here. For folks who are just starting on their journey as a home bartender, and for you, I'll put a little bit more of a fine point on it. For folks who are beginning to experiment beyond the set classic cocktails like the martini, the old fashioned, the Manhattan, for folks who are starting to want to get that little itch to create something that's their own, do you have any advice for them?
Absolutely. The most important thing to do is taste as many different ingredients as you can. All of those things that you read about in books, all of the obscure classic cocktail ingredients, and all of those random spirits with hard to pronounce names, all the amari, all the weird fortified wines from southern France and central Italy, and all of that weird stuff. Taste every single thing that you can find. Get to know it. Get to get to know the way that they're made, the way that they unfold in your palate, the differences in flavors, and then, you know, get to know how they taste together. You know, that's what it really comes down to. It comes down to knowing your ingredients. The more ingredients you're familiar with, and the more familiar you are with each one, the more opportunities you'll find to make interesting combinations and create new flavors and new flavor contours.
Right. And this goes back sort of to spirits and cocktail ingredients as ultimately agricultural products. They all start as a seed. Somebody grows them, somebody picks them, somebody processes them, and then eventually they make their way to you. So when you're staring at a finished product, whether it's a spirit, a liqueur, Amaro vermouth, or something that's a fresh ingredient, get your impression, stick your face in it, and then see if you can do a little bit of homework and trace it back to where it came from. And usually during that process, you learn something.
What does it taste like, and why does it taste like that? You know, those are always questions that are worth asking about every single thing that you read about, every single thing that you taste and work with. It's always worth learning more about them.
If you walk into a good cocktail bar as a patron and you are really curious about an ingredient, and you request a quarter ounce of it, do you think that a bartender would turn somebody down typically?
I think it depends on the ingredient. I'm usually happy to let people taste things unless they're extremely expensive things.
Sure.
that can be problematic.
So don't ask for like a quarter ounce of truffles.
Right, exactly. but you know, in my experience, you know, most people who work behind cocktail bars are really excited about these ingredients, and they're really excited when somebody is actually interested in them and makes that effort to ask the question and learn more about it. And most of the time, in my experience, if you ask what something is, they're going to pour you a sample without you even asking.
Right. That's been my experience as well. So Paul, this has been absolutely fantastic. A lot of great things to think about. How can people find you in your digital space, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday in its digital and physical space?
It's easy to find me on Instagram. Once again, I said before, my handle is express and discard with underscores in between each word. So it's easy to look me up on there. And I try to be very, I try to be good with interactions. I try to answer questions and things when people comment. I try to keep up on that. And I work at Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which is located at 261 South 21st Street in Philadelphia. That's in the Rittenhouse Square neighborhood. If you're in town, you know, it's right off the main drag for shopping and restaurants and everything. It's really easy to get to, so you should absolutely come by and visit us. It's a great spot, great food, great everything.
Great. And do they have a handle on social media?
Oh, yeah. I believe they are Friday.Saturday.Sunday. Let me confirm that.
I believe that's correct. So we'll list all those handles over on the show notes page at modernbarcart.com. And I'm going to drop in a dope-ass map with a pinpoint right on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So for anybody who wants to know where it is, you can click on that interactive map, scroll around Philadelphia. Don't break the Liberty Bell. It's already got it kind of messed up. But Paul, thanks again for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's two big things you can do for us here at Modern Bar Cart. One would be to tell your friends and family if you think they'd enjoy listening to us talk about cocktails. And if they don't download podcasts, they can always stream our episodes on their desktop directly from the show notes page at modernbarcart.com. The other thing you can do to help would be to head on over to iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts and leave us a review. 5 stars are great, but we're more interested in your feedback. And the beauty is, the more reviews we have, the easier it will be for other folks out there to learn about our show. We're trying to start cocktail revolution here, and by spreading the word, you're helping us fight the good fight. You can always reach us by emailing podcast@modernbarcart.com if you're looking for cocktail or bartending advice, or if you're a pro who would like to pull up a mic and be interviewed for all to hear. Also, definitely follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Modern Bar Cart for cocktail porn, recipes, and entertaining tips. And keep an eye out for new product releases and special offers, which are happening all the time. We love our listeners, and we really enjoy giving you exclusive discounts and sneak peeks at our latest and greatest cocktail projects. This episode may be over, but for you, the mixological fun and adventures are just beginning, so remember, folks, drink responsibly and experiment boldly. This episode was made possible with editing and production assistance by Samantha Reed, cocktail wisdom by Paul MacDonald, and a little bit of interview magic by yours truly. This has been a Modern Bar Cart production, copyright 2019.